The shiny black hat perched confidently atop Karen's perfectly coiffed blonde hair as she strutted through the police station, her stilettos clicking against the linoleum floor. With a smug grin, she sauntered past the stunned officers, her manicured fingers tracing the gold emblem on the cap. "Attention, everyone," she bellowed, her voice dripping with self-importance. "I am now the new police chief of this station. Any objections will be met with severe consequences." The room fell silent, the officers exchanging bewildered glances. Karen relished the power she now wielded, puffing out her chest and tapping her foot impatiently. When no one dared to challenge her, she let out a triumphant laugh. "That's what I thought," she sneered. "Now, all of you, get back to work. I have a new precinct to run." As the shell-shocked officers reluctantly returned to their duties, Karen sauntered into the chief's office, carelessly tossing her oversized purse onto the desk. She plopped down in the plush leather chair, propping her feet up and admiring the nameplate that now bore her name. "This is my kingdom now," she murmured, a sinister grin spreading across her face. Her reign of terror had only just begun. Karen's infamy had long preceded her arrival at the police station. A notorious entitled and manipulative socialite, she was accustomed to getting her way through a combination of wealth, charm, and shameless exploitation. She had systematically bullied and bribed her way through every facet of life, from securing the best table at the most exclusive restaurants to evading speeding tickets and parking fines. Now, with the power of the police force at her fingertips, Karen was determined to flex her newfound authority in the most outrageous ways imaginable. The officers, still reeling from the audacity of her takeover, knew better than to challenge her. As Karen settled into her new role, she began issuing a series of increasingly bizarre and capricious decrees. Parking tickets were abolished for all residents of her gated community. The entire narcotics division was reassigned to deliver her weekly shopping haul from the designer boutiques. And any officer who dared to question her orders was immediately dismissed, their careers and reputations left in tatters. The once respected police station had become a playground for Karen's whims, a dark satire of justice and order. The community, initially stunned by the sudden change in leadership, soon learned to tread carefully, lest they incur the wrath of the self-proclaimed police chief Karen. But even as Karen reveled in her newly acquired power, a growing sense of unease began to gnaw at her. The adulation and fear of the officers were not enough to quell the underlying insecurity that had driven her to this point. Deep down, she knew that her reign could not last forever, and that the consequences of her actions would eventually catch up with her. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, one that would test the limits of Karen's cunning and the resilience of the very institution she had sought to control. The news of Karen's self-proclaimed ascension to the position of police chief spread like wildfire through the community, sparking a mix of outrage, bewilderment, and begrudging resignation. While some residents were emboldened to voice their disapproval, the majority opted to keep their heads down, fearful of incurring Karen's wrath. Chief of Police Robert Simmons, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for integrity, had been out of the station on a training seminar when Karen's coup had taken place. Rushing back to the precinct, he was greeted by a scene of utter chaos. "What the hell is going on here?" Simmons demanded, his brow furrowed in a fierce scowl as he surveyed the uneasy officers. It's Karen, sir," one of the younger officers stammered, his eyes downcast. She sort of took over." Simmons felt a vein in his forehead throb with rising anger. "Took over? What do you mean, took over?" She showed up this morning and declared herself the new police chief," the officer explained, his voice trembling. We didn't know what to do, sir. She seemed so convinced, and we didn't want to risk losing our jobs." Simmons let out a heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Where is she now?" "In your office, sir. She's been, making some changes." Without another word, Simmons stormed towards his office, his heavy boots echoing through the silent station. He flung the door open, his gaze immediately landing on Karen, who was reclined in his chair, casually filing her nails. "Get out of my chair, Karen," he growled, his voice low and menacing. Karen looked up, an amused smirk playing on her lips. "Ah, Chief Simmons. So nice of you to join us. I was just getting comfortable in my new office." "This is not your office, and you are not the police chief," Simmons snapped. "Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Get out of my chair before I have you arrested for impersonating a police officer." Karen let out a melodramatic sigh, slowly rising from the chair. "Oh, Robert, always so quick to resort to threats and intimidation. Can't we just have a civilized discussion about this?" "There's nothing to discuss," Simmons retorted. "You have no authority here, and your little stunt ends now." "We'll see about that," Karen purred, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "I think you'll find that I have more influence than you realize." With that, she swept past Simmons, her heels clicking against the floor as she exited the office. Simmons watched her go, his jaw clenched tight, his mind racing with the implications of this disastrous turn of events. He knew that Karen would not go down without a fight, and the battle that lay ahead would test the very foundations of the police department he had sworn to protect. But Simmons was no stranger to challenges, and he was determined to reclaim his rightful place and restore order to the chaos that had descended upon the precinct. The war for control had begun. As Chief Simmons watched Karen's retreating figure, his mind raced with a myriad of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a mounting sense of urgency. This was no ordinary situation. The very integrity of the police department was at stake, and he knew he needed to act swiftly and decisively to regain control. Turning to the gathered officers, Simmons fixed them with a stern gaze. "All of you, listen up. I want every available officer in my office now. We've got a serious situation on our hands, and I need your full cooperation." The officers scurried to comply, their faces etched with a mixture of trepidation and relief. They knew that with Simmons back at the helm, order might finally be restored, but the looming presence of Karen's influence cast a pall of uncertainty over the proceedings. Once the officers had assembled, Simmons launched into a succinct yet impassioned speech. "As you all know, Karen has unlawfully and unacceptably inserted herself as the self-proclaimed police chief of this station. This is a clear violation of protocol, and I will not stand for it. We need to act quickly and decisively to remove her from power and restore the integrity of this department." A murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks, and Simmons nodded, satisfied that his words had struck a chord. "Now, I want a full investigation into Karen's activities and any potential collusion or corruption within the department. I want to know every shady deal she's made, every officer she's threatened or bribed. We need to build an ironclad case against her, and I need your full cooperation to do it." The officers, invigorated by Simmons' unwavering leadership, sprang into action, their faces set with determination. Simmons watched them go, his own resolve hardening with each passing moment. As the investigation unfolded, the extent of Karen's web of deceit and manipulation became increasingly clear. Officers who had once been cowed by her threats now came forward, emboldened by Simmons' unwavering commitment to justice. They recounted stories of Karen's ruthless exploitation of the system, from rigging parking ticket quotas to secretly funneling police resources into her personal ventures. Simmons' blood boiled with each new revelation, his hands clenching into fists as he listened to the testimonies. This was no mere power grab. It was a calculated, systematic dismantling of the very institution he had dedicated his life to upholding. With evidence mounting, Simmons knew that he needed to move quickly. Karen's influence was far-reaching, and he couldn't risk her using her connections to evade prosecution or rally support from her wealthy social circles. It was time to take the fight directly to Karen, to confront her in a way that would leave no doubt about who truly held the reins of power in this precinct. Karen had always been adept at navigating the intricacies of power, using her wealth, charm, and reputation to manipulate the system to her advantage. But as the investigation into her takeover of the police station gathered momentum, she found herself increasingly on the defensive. Word of the impending showdown between her and Chief Simmons had spread like wildfire through the community, and Karen could feel the tides of public opinion turning against her. No longer was she the untouchable socialite. Now, she was the villain, the embodiment of corruption and entitlement. Determined to maintain her grip on the precinct, Karen began to pull out all the stops. She reached out to her vast network of connections, calling in favors and issuing veiled threats to anyone who dared to cross her. Politicians, business leaders, and even a few high-ranking police officials found themselves in her crosshairs, their loyalty and cooperation secured through a combination of persuasion and coercion. But Simmons was not one to be easily swayed. He had spent decades navigating the treacherous political landscape of law enforcement, and he was well versed in the art of withstanding pressure from powerful figures. As Karen's machinations unfolded, Simmons remained steadfast, his focus laser-sharp on building the case against her. The tension in the police station was palpable, as officers found themselves caught in the middle of the brewing conflict. Some, intimidated by Karen's influence, remained silent, while others, inspired by Simmons' unwavering integrity, stepped forward to provide crucial information and evidence. Simmons knew that he needed to strike quickly, before Karen could consolidate her power further. He called an emergency press conference, summoning the media to the station and laying bare the sordid details of Karen's scheme. As the cameras flashed and the microphones were thrust in his face, Simmons delivered a scathing indictment of Karen's actions, outlining the extent of her corruption and the damage it had done to the public's trust in the police force. This individual, who has no legal authority or qualifications to lead this department, has engaged in a flagrant abuse of power, Simmons declared, his voice carrying a steely edge. She has manipulated the system, bribed and coerced officers, and sought to undermine the very foundations of law enforcement in this community. And I, for one, will not stand for it. The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and murmurs, the tension in the air palpable. Karen, who had been conspicuously absent from the press conference, was surely watching from the shadows, her fury building with each passing moment. Simmons knew that the battle was far from over, but he also understood that he had struck a decisive blow against Karen's reign of terror. The stage was set for a climactic showdown, one that would determine the fate of the police station and the very soul of the community it served. The fallout from Simmons' damning press conference was immediate and far-reaching. Karen's carefully constructed web of influence began to unravel as politicians, business leaders, and even some of her most ardent supporters distanced themselves from the scandal. Furious at the public humiliation, Karen launched a frantic counterattack, flooding the airwaves with angry denials and threatening lawsuits against Simmons and the police department. But her shrill cries of innocence only served to further erode her credibility, as more and more evidence of her wrongdoing came to light. Simmons, buoyed by the public's overwhelming support, redoubled his efforts to oust Karen from the police station. He assembled a team of the department's most trusted and experienced officers, tasking them with conducting a thorough investigation and building an airtight case against the disgraced socialite. The officers, once cowed by Karen's intimidation tactics, now worked tirelessly, driven by a renewed sense of purpose and a desire to restore the integrity of their beloved institution. They combed through financial records, interviewed witnesses, and painstakingly pieced together the intricate web of corruption that had been woven under Karen's watch. As the investigation progressed, the scope of Karen's misdeeds became increasingly clear. She had not only used her wealth and influence to manipulate the police force, but had also exploited her position to enrich herself and her inner circle. Embezzlement, fraud, and even allegations of collusion with organized crime began to surface, shocking even the most jaded of observers. Simmons, his face etched with a grim determination, presented the damning evidence to the city's governing body, demanding that Karen be immediately removed from her self-proclaimed position of power. The public outcry was deafening, as citizens who had once been cowed by Karen's intimidation tactics, now bravely stepped forward to testify against her. Faced with the overwhelming weight of the evidence and the public's unwavering support for Simmons, the city's leaders had no choice but to act. Karen was unceremoniously stripped of her ill-gotten title, and a warrant was issued for her arrest on a litany of charges ranging from abuse of power to racketeering. As the news of Karen's downfall spread through the community, a collective sigh of relief could be felt. The nightmare was finally over, and the police department, under Simmons' steadfast leadership, could begin the arduous task of rebuilding trust and restoring the public's faith in the system. But for Karen, the true reckoning was only just beginning. As she was led away in handcuffs, her designer outfit rumpled, and her carefully curated image shattered, she knew that the consequences of her actions would haunt her for years to come. The once untouchable socialite had finally met her match in the form of Chief Robert Simmons, a man of unwavering integrity who refused to be cowed by her wealth and influence. It was a lesson in the power of truth and the indomitable spirit of those who fight for justice. As the fallout from Karen's dramatic downfall continued to reverberate through the community, Chief Simmons found himself faced with an even greater challenge: rebuilding the shattered trust and morale of the police force. The officers, many of whom had been cowed and manipulated by Karen's ruthless tactics, were now grappling with a range of emotions: relief, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. Simmons knew that restoring their faith in the system would be no easy task, but he was determined to do whatever it took to right the wrongs that had been committed under his watch. Summoning the entire department for a mandatory meeting, Simmons stood before them, his expression somber yet resolute. "I know that the events of the past few weeks have been nothing short of traumatic for all of us," he began, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity. "We have been through a trial by fire, a test of our values and our commitment to the very principles that we have sworn to uphold." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Simmons raised his hand, silencing them. "But we have emerged from this darkness stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to serve this community with honor and integrity. The actions of one individual, no matter how powerful or influential, cannot and will not be allowed to tarnish the reputation of this department or the vital work that we do." Simmons paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled officers, meeting each of their eyes with unwavering conviction. "From this day forward, we will rebuild. We will restore the trust that has been broken, and we will do so by recommitting ourselves to the principles of justice, fairness, and transparency. No more backdoor deals, no more special favors, and no more abuses of power. We are the guardians of this community, and we will act as such." The officers, their postures straightening and their expressions hardening with resolve, erupted into thunderous applause. Simmons raised his hand, silencing them once more. "But this is not just about words," he continued, his voice taking on a steely edge. "We will be implementing a series of reforms, both in terms of policy and personnel, to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. Any officer found to be complicit in Karen's schemes will be swiftly and decisively removed from this department. There will be no exceptions, no special treatment. We will hold ourselves to the highest standards of accountability." Simmons paused, his gaze sweeping across the room once more. "This is our chance to show this community and the world that the Clearwater Police Department is a force to be reckoned with, a beacon of integrity, professionalism, and service. Are you all with me?" The roar of affirmation that echoed through the station was deafening, and Simmons felt a surge of pride and renewed purpose. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but he knew that with the unwavering support of his officers, they would emerge from this crisis stronger than ever before. As the Clearwater Police Department embarked on its mission to rebuild trust and restore its tarnished reputation, Karen's own downfall unfolded with a sense of grim inevitability. Stripped of her ill-gotten power and facing a litany of criminal charges, Karen found herself in an unfamiliar position, one where her wealth and influence held little sway. The once untouchable socialite was now a pariah, her name synonymous with corruption and abuse of power. Forced to relinquish her lavish lifestyle and confront the consequences of her actions, Karen's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The confident, manipulative woman who had once commanded the room with a mere glance was now reduced to a trembling, defensive figure, desperately clinging to the shreds of her former glory. Her first court appearance was a spectacle, with reporters and spectators alike eager to witness the mighty fall of Clearwater's former police chief. As the charges were read aloud, Karen's face contorted with a mix of shock and outrage, her attempts to interrupt and interject only serving to further cement her guilt in the eyes of the judge. The prosecution, led by a tenacious prosecutor who had spent countless hours poring over the evidence gathered by Simmons and his team, painted a damning picture of Karen's misdeeds. Embezzlement, bribery, abuse of power. The litany of crimes she had committed seemed to know no bounds, and the judge listened, their expression growing increasingly grim with each new revelation. Karen's desperate attempts to assert her innocence and cast doubt on the evidence were met with skepticism and disdain. The once adoring public had turned against her, and even her most loyal associates had distanced themselves, unwilling to risk being tainted by the scandal. As the trial wore on, Karen's world continued to crumble. Faced with the overwhelming weight of the evidence and the public's overwhelming desire for justice, she was ultimately found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The moment the gavel fell, signaling the end of her trial, Karen's composure finally shattered. She wept openly, her carefully cultivated image of invincibility shattered beyond repair. The woman who had once strode through the police station with such arrogance was now reduced to a broken, humbled figure, forced to confront the consequences of her own actions. For Chief Simmons and the Clearwater Police Department, Karen's downfall marked a bittersweet victory. While they had succeeded in restoring the integrity of the institution they served, the scars of the ordeal would linger, a reminder of the damage that unchecked power and corruption can inflict. As Karen was led away to begin her sentence, Simmons stood tall, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but he knew that with the unwavering support of his officers and the trust of the community, they would emerge from this crisis stronger and more resilient than ever before. As the dust settled on the Karen saga, the Clearwater Police Department found itself at a crossroads. The scars of the ordeal ran deep, and the road to recovery would be long and arduous. But under Simmons' steadfast leadership, the officers were determined to forge a new path, one that would restore the department's tarnished reputation and earn back the trust of the community. The reforms Simmons had promised were swiftly implemented, with a renewed focus on transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct. Officers underwent intensive training sessions, learning to navigate the complex web of laws and regulations with unwavering integrity. The department's Internal Affairs Division was overhauled, with a mandate to root out any lingering traces of corruption or abuse of power. Simmons himself led by example, setting the tone for the entire organization. He made a point of being visible in the community, engaging with residents and listening to their concerns. He forged partnerships with local organizations and advocacy groups, working to build bridges and foster a renewed sense of trust and cooperation. The changes, while not without their challenges, began to bear fruit. The public's perception of the police department shifted as the once disillusioned citizens saw the genuine efforts being made to regain their confidence. Calls for service increased, and the officers, buoyed by a renewed sense of purpose, tackled each new challenge with a dedication that had been sorely lacking in the aftermath of Karen's reign. But even as the department's reputation began to heal, the shadow of Karen's legacy continued to loom large. The trials and tribulations of the past had left indelible scars, both on the officers and the community they served. Simmons knew that true healing would take time, and that the journey ahead would be filled with setbacks and challenges. Yet, as he surveyed the transformed landscape of the police station, Simmons couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. The officers, once cowed and demoralized, now stood tall, their eyes shining with a renewed sense of purpose. They had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and more unified than ever before. And as for Karen, she had been relegated to the annals of history, her name a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked power and hubris. Serving out her sentence in a state penitentiary, she was forced to confront the full weight of her actions, stripped of the privilege and entitlement that had once defined her very existence. For Simmons and the Clearwater Police Department, the journey was far from over. But as they looked to the future, they knew that they were better equipped than ever to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The lessons of the past had been hard won, but they had forged a new path, one that would guide them towards a brighter, more just tomorrow.